Hello, beautiful people. My name is Emma.
And I'm MC.
And we are your hosts of the G-Forces podcast. So, this past weekend was the Austrian Grand Prix, and it was a little crazy. I honestly feel like I can't even remember what happened during the one practice session because everything else was insane.
I've heard a lot of people saying that for new fans, this is crazy. But I heard that this was just like what racing was like for competition.
Yeah, this was racing.
Like, this is what racing is.
Yeah.
Like,
this is what every race in 2021 was. Like, this is what the battle between Lewis and Max was every single race, which I don't know if I would have been able to handle that, to be honest.
Oh my god, I think I'm in one instance I'm sad that we didn't see that age of racing. Like, there's
I would have been really
stressed
out though.
But yeah, I definitely think I would have been stressed. I do think it's interesting that there are comparisons to that.
Oh, there's a lot to talk about there.
We'll get to that later on. There was some big news that was announced before the race weekend. So some of it was we got one more person on the grid. Pierre Gasly confirmed.
Correct.
He is with Alpine.
And Lance.
Lance Stroll is...
Shocker.
Hold your...
His dad's keeping him on the team.
He's with Aston Martin.
Imagine it was like Lance Stroll replaces Sergio Perez at Red Bull.
Jeez. That would be really crazy. These are not confirmed news, but a rumor that is going around the grid that I think has been going around the last 2 weekends is the Danny Ricciardo.
That's almost
he's at the end of his.
But he might be replaced
career.
In the middle of the season.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that there have been comments that have been made by Helmut Marko. I don't
believe the majority of the things that man
to Red
says.
Bull, whatever. But then, it's been proven. Like, we've had moments where Christian Horner has been like, Helmut Marko needs to stop talking to media. Yeah. So, we'll take that with what it is. And then there is one thing that I'll talk about when we get to all of the track info. But, yeah, I mean, just going into the race weekend, it was crazy news.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not crazy news, but just... It was a busy weekend.
It was a very busy weekend. And the fact that it was a sprint weekends feel like
it was
dream. It makes the whole weekend feel like it was a fever dream.
I think it's because...
There's so much I have to really pay attention to.
Well, I feel like there is a very, very big difference in what you pay attention during all the practices. Like, the practices, like, I don't even need to really watch. I feel like I'm listening for the pundits.
Yeah.
And, like, to see, like, the development of the car. But when... 2 of those sessions are taken out and they're replaced with a mini race and a mini quali. It's like my brain, like, it's almost just like, it just melts into each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I think I love a traditional weekend.
I think I agree with the racers that I'm overtired when it comes to sprint weekends.
It just kind of feels like it's over, like, it's so condensed.
Well, and the reason why they started sprint weekends was because they wanted more racing for people.
Yeah.
Okay, so then make the regulations so that the cars are so close together. Like, It's not, in my mind, not that hard of a concept to understand, but apparently to the FIA, everything's a hard concept to understand.
Emma and me have...
I hate all sporting organizations. Yeah. I hate the NFL. I hate the NCAA. FIFA. They all suck.
Yeah, I think they're all just...
They're businesses.
Yeah, it's a business that's running an organization, and it's very sticky.
Yeah, every time.
Nothing
is ever clean. It's always really dirty.
Yeah.
Under the table. Anyways. So yeah, what should we get into it?
Yeah, let's get into the track info.
Awesome. Thank you for saying
I said it before because Emma has missed the track info.
I was going to say practice?
For the last, 3 or 4 Grand Prix, so don't worry, guys. I know you really want this.
Oh, also, we're back together if you couldn't tell.
Yeah, for those that are listening, we're in the same location. For those that are listening, you can probably tell the audio is not as crystal clear as it was last week.
Well, so that is because we're using our old mic for right now, and then as we move into Mary Catherine's new home, since she's now a homeowner, we are going to have our studio set up there, and we're going to be able to set up our nicer mics there. So until we get there, in probably about a month, we'll be using our old mic for right now. So really, when it comes to summer break and the second half of the season, we'll have crystal clear mics.
Yeah, it'll be an upgrade.
It'll be an upgrade for sure. All right, track info.
Okay, so the official race name for this weekend was the Formula One Qatar Airways Austrian Grand Prix 2024. The circuit name is currently the Red Bull Ring. It was previously the A1 Ring, and then prior to that, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation. It was the Österreich Ring.
I think that's correct. That looks right to me.
That's phonetically what I'm going with. The location of this racetrack is in Spielberg, Austria, and the first Grand Prix held here for Formula One was in 1970. The circuit length, which has changed once or twice throughout the years, is currently 4.318 kilometers, which translates into 2.68 miles. The number of laps they had to do is 71. This is on the shorter side for tracks. Which is why they're in the 70s as opposed to, like, the 60s or even, I think a few races we hit the 50s. Race distance we're right in that 190-mile area, 306.452 kilometers or 190.42 miles. There are 10 turns on this track, so honestly I feel like that's pretty low in terms of turns. Like, I don't know, I feel like we're normally in the
usually
teens.
At, like, between, like, 11 and, like, 14,
yeah.
I feel like.
And then the lap record was placed in 2020 by Carlos Sainz, who was with McLaren at this point, and he did a lap in 1:05.619 seconds. There are 3 DRS zones, so DRS detection zone 1, which also, the DRS zones are really tight, I feel like, in this.
Oh, yeah, there were times where someone would have their DRS on, and then they would go around the turn, and then they would turn it back on immediately.
So DRS detection zone 1 and 2 specifically are really close together. Yeah. No, they're all really close together. I think there's a gap between 2 and 3. Anyways, DRS detection zone 1 is right before turn 1, and activation begins after turn 1. Detection zone 2 starts right before turn 3. Activation begins right after turn 3. And then DRS detection zone 3 starts after turn 9, and activation begins after turn 10. So it's like boom, boom, boom. And then some like little fun facts regarding this circuit. So safety concerns became a big deal in the mid-90s, so the track was rebuilt entirely. If you listen to last week's episode, we discussed, is it named A1 after the sauce? And I can confirm it is not. It was paid for, the 90s construction was paid for by a large portion of the construction was paid by A1 Mobile, which is an Austrian mobile, like probably like AT&T, Verizon. Okay. And so it was named after a I was gonna say, I feel
like A1 is a European UK thing.
It's Austrian. At least.
A1 sauce.
Oh, I was like, it might be. But.
I don't think they have it in Europe here.
Anyways, so that's why it's called A1 Ring. The track was subsequently then sold in 2004 to, do you know how to say Dietrich?
I think that's how you say that.
Do you know how to say his last name?
How do you spell it?
Matisich?
Sure. I only ever hear people call him Dietrich.
So, Dietrich is the founder of Red Bull. He's, like, the guy that, like, Max is constantly talking about, Christian Horner, like, they're always talking about him. But basically, that's why it turned into the Red Bull Ring, was because it was sold to him in 2004. Mm-hmm. And in 2014, F1 returned to Austria. So there was a period of time where, like, the agreement to have a Grand Prix here had terminated, so there was a handful of years. The last fun fact for this track is, and for those that are new and didn't get to watch last season, There was something crazy, like over 3,000 track limits that the FIA stewards had to go over for the Austrian Grand Prix. And so track limits have always been a huge issue here. So they decided to change the track specifically at turn 9 and turn 10. They ended up adding a curb and gravel beyond the curb, just specifically in this area. They didn't want to put gravel everywhere, where I think we saw, was it in Canada or I feel like one of the
China?
last. Yeah, one of the last few ones, there's gravel like pretty heavily on the track.
I think it was China.
And this one specifically did not want to add an insane amount of gravel because...
I like the gravel. I know people are like...
Hold on. Okay. Because they have motorcycle racing here. And so it's a safety issue.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense.
So
I did see some people saying that they might not have done it everywhere because, like... that you do want some track limits issues because it makes it interesting. Where with, like, if you go into the gravel, like, that's when you obviously are off the track, and that's where the track limit issue is going to happen on those turns. And, like, it doesn't make it kind of, like, dicey then because it's, like, an automatic, like, you're not going to be, like, it's going to slow you down or you're going to be off the track then fully. Where if they don't have the gravel, then it makes it, like, they can add penalties onto it, but... I mean, you saw in the race that there was still the ability to go off track enough that you could get penalties.
Yeah, no, there was definitely an opportunity. I think that this was just to curb the amount of track limit issues that they were facing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that is the Austrian Grand Prix and the Red Bull Ring.
All right, now we're going to get into practice. So, free practice. There was only one, obviously, since it's a sprint weekend.
I literally have like 3 notes.
I have 2 bullet points.
Yeah,
and I didn't even write down who placed where because it didn't really matter at the end of the day. My one of my 2 bullet notes was lots of traffic. That's so helpful. Thank you, Emma, for being such a good note taker.
I do have who is at top because I thought who is at second was interesting in the distance.
Okay, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I wrote down was 30 minutes left. Max complains of engine issues and pulls to the side of the track. And I was jumping for joy at this moment, which I always hate to say that I do that whenever it's Max having a car problem, but it's just like, we're going to have a new race winner. Which we did, but not because of a Max car problem-ish, sort of.
I think the thing is that the removing the drivers from the car, the Red Bull is just so good that, like, I feel like anyone gets excited when it has technical problems because it's like, oh shit, Red Bull's got to work now.
Yes and no, though. Checo has not performed well at all.
Yeah, I wonder if, as David Coulthard and Ted Lasso would say, I wonder if he's having a little bit of the yips.
Maybe. But, I mean, his contract's there for the next couple of years, so... so that's all I have for practice. What else do you have?
So I talked about, everyone was buzzing about Max. Essentially, the other biggest reason why this was such a point of contention for so many people, and we talked about this really briefly last episode, but Max is in a little bit of a power unit predicament.
Yes.
He is at his limit.
He is.
For a lot of aspects of the power unit, too, because it's pretty broken up.
We're almost halfway into the season.
And when you start to replace parts like that, penalties ensue. And so I think also it's this whole, like, who's going to be the first person to be getting power unit penalties?
It's going to be Max, I think.
So that was also why it was such, like, a talk. And then Max did end up, after Red Bull reset his car, which if you didn't watch practice, there's a pretty funny moment where Max is just, like, rolling down a hill in this, like, F1 vehicle. He ended up restarting his car, and they didn't obviously disclose what the issue was. So Max ended up going back into practice. He set the top time, but Oscar Piastri came in second fastest, 0.2 seconds between the two. Which, obviously, it's not as close as, like, other scenarios have been this weekend. I just thought it was interesting. Obviously, again, it's practice. Practice is just practice. Like, you can't take anything from it.
But like Ted Lasso said, practice is practice.
Yeah. So, I just thought that was a little tidbit to kind of focus on, because I'm Team Oscar, I think.
I think
There's
everyone's
a win
Team
coming.
Oscar.
Well, yeah.
I feel it. I feel it.
So.
He's had a turn of bad luck recently, I think.
Yeah, I
but
think.
But then good luck at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's. I'm torn. I think everyone's kind of having weekends like that, though. Like, across the board. Where they're having, like, a really good moment, and then they have a really shit moment, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And I think it legitimately is happening everywhere. You know? Everyone. I think Danny Rick is a perfect example. Like,
and then you have some teams that are just always bad luck.
Well, yeah.
Williams and Steak.
Steak and...
Aston Martin recently. Aston Martin
at that point, but... That's all I have, so not sure if you want to get into sprint quali.
Yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so sprint qualifying. For SQ1, we see both Lewis and Zhou. They both had their times deleted. Everybody was on medium tires, and the only other note that I wrote down for sprint quality, because these were the notes that I took live, was Logan out-qualified Alex, and I put an exclamation point, because that's the first time ever that's happened.
I think there was one instance earlier in the season where he did out-qualify, but it wasn't...
Because Alex got a penalty or something.
Yeah, it wasn't based off of, like, quote-unquote merit.
Yeah.
This was purely merit. I was excited to see it. You know, I think it's...
we didn't talk about that.
What?
The rumors of Logan Sargent.
Oh, yeah, so we'll get... Nice
because we're talking about Logan.
Basically, there is... I mean, it's pretty obvious at this point that
Logan will
not be an F1, and so now there's a discussion of where is Logan going to end up, and I think the obvious rumor is that he's going to end up at IndyCar next year.
Possibly on Prema's team for IndyCar.
So it'll be exciting to see for the IndyCar world. I think he's going to thrive.
I think he's going to bring a lot of F1 fans who did not feel like watching IndyCar to watch IndyCar.
Yeah. I also think Logan has been given a good run.
He has.
I think that...
An honest run, too.
And that's the thing, is that I think he's had a difficult car to work with, but, you know, I think... He hasn't had the bullshit that you get that, like, Red Bull does, you know? Yeah. It's, like, that's just it, you know, at the end of the day.
It happens.
I think that is what I'm not enjoying to see, but that it's not, like, killing my soul knowing that he's leaving.
Yeah.
Knocked out of SQ1 was Danny Rick, Nico Hülkenberg, Valtteri Bottas, Alex Albon, and Zhou Guanyu. So, some similar names that we've been seeing pretty
all the
normally.
Pundits have been saying that ever since Stake brought their upgrades to, I don't remember where, Zhou has particularly felt uncomfortable with the car, that he has not been able to get the feel for it, that he has said that it is not working well for him, and that's obviously evident from the results. Typically, I feel like Zhou does do a little bit better than he has been.
I mean, it's been bad.
It's been abysmal.
Been seconds behind. Like,
yeah,
it's
like,
not like he's with the pack and just at the end. It's
like he's qualifying like a second slower than everybody else.
I wonder. This is like such like not a cool thing to say, but I wonder if it's the relationship is kind of obviously done between the two drivers and the team.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's just kind of like they're just throwing the kitchen sink at the car for next year.
Maybe.
And that sounds terrible, but I don't know enough about Sauber. I feel like out of all of the teams, they're the most like veiled. I feel like, I mean, they don't have a team principal, right? They have like
a team,
like something. Yeah. But yeah, it's a shame. But anyways, SQ2, I don't have any notes.
Okay, so I have one note, and then I started to write who got kicked out, and then I stopped.
Okay, I am knocked out.
So that's really helpful for me. The only note that I have is, and I actually wrote a sad face, and I drew a little tear next to it, was Logan Sargent's track limits. His time was deleted because of track limits, and it was actually a good lap that he was putting in. And DC was like, "Oh, that sucks." Like I remember DC being like, That's a real bummer for him," and so that's why I put a little tear next to my sad face.
So, knocked out of SQ2 was Kevin Magnussen, Lance Stroll, Fernando Alonso, Yuki Tsunoda, and Logan Sargent. I will say, I feel like Aston Martin
is
just
going down the drain right now.
Something is going wrong, and
they need upgrades, and they need them now.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, too, is that it's we're halfway...
11, I think.
Round 11, so, like, we're close to halfway through the season, so I'm hoping that they pick it up, but it's been rough.
Yeah.
SQ3, Mercedes were the first to go out with, 3 minutes left. No one went out.
Yeah, I wrote nobody went out until about a minute and a half left. And when I was watching that, I was like, you all are stupid.
Well, and I think this kind of gives us the prime example of, the frustrations we as spectators have because we don't understand the point of the strategy. But the whole, sitting there waiting till the very end, and I get it, you want to put it in the fastest lap, but... There was an incident with Charles Leclerc's car where it essentially got stuck in the pit lane, and it caused him to hold up traffic, which I think was Checo, and
I don't know.
I don't remember who the other driver was, but there was a moment where they had cut it so close, they weren't sure if they were going to get a time on the board.
That the other drivers weren't going to be able to either.
And then Charles ended up did not get to put a time up at all because of the way the qualifying ended. And I would love someone to sit there and explain, what the strategic point of waiting that and maybe this was, obviously they weren't expecting his car to, shit the bed. But, what's the, why wouldn't you have gone out earlier?
I know that they want to do, the track evolution is, always constantly happening. And so, the more cars drive on it, the more, it'll be better to drive on. And so they're hoping that, they can get the best, the track evolution, it's, peak moment. But everyone's hoping that.
Yeah, it's just, is it worth that big of a risk?
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
No, I agree. So who was the finishing order?
So Max was in P1, Lando was P2, Oscar was 3, George, Carlos, Lewis, Checo, Esteban, Pierre, and Charles. I will say Alpine, I think they're talk of the town.
Alpine and Haas are on.
Haas has really
killed it this weekend.
Yeah, in the race in general, but I'm the way we're talking about Aston Martin was how I thought Alpine's entire season was gonna go.
I'm sure you could go back to a few episodes ago, and I was like, Alpine screwed. They can't go anywhere from here. But yeah. Well, we're gonna get into the sprint now.
The grid was set normally, but
normal, how it does, how it goes.
But you made me. Alex Albon would not start 19th on the grid. He would end up starting from the pit lane due to adjustments that Williams made to his car. I guess I feel like if you're starting 19th and 20th, sometimes it's just screw it. We'll make the adjustment. Start from the pit lane.
Yeah.
It
doesn't really matter at that point.
Lando kept attempting to pass Max, almost succeeding in taking the lead, but Max quickly took it back, which left an opportunity for Oscar to move into the drama.
Yeah. It was almost similar to George passing at the start.
Yeah.
What was it, last weekend?
Yeah.
But it was Oscar passing Lando this time. Max still got out ahead. Mm-hmm. Oscar passed Lando, and then Lando was kind of stuck behind Oscar. And the issue is that, this is something that I've kind of noticed, and I heard the pundits talk about it as well, is that Lando is able to keep pace up with Max, but then when he gets stuck behind Oscar, and, Oscar is the lead McLaren, Lando, like, they cannot keep up with Max then. Like, Oscar does not have the race
Yeah.
pace to keep up with Max sometimes.
But then
And then they drop
Lando
off.
loses.
And so then Lando just stays there. But, like, Lando ended up, well, so Max ended up winning by 4.6 seconds. He was ahead of Oscar by 4.6 seconds, and Lando was 0.7 behind him. But Lando, for a while, just, like, let it go to, like, 2-3 seconds behind Oscar and just, like, was there. I don't know what was going on exactly, but this has happened, like, several times now where, like, Lando will kind of get behind Oscar because Oscar passed him for some reason, and, like, Lando then just drops back, and Oscar has a hard time passing, like, Max or Charles.
It's interesting. I feel like if you were to combine Lando and Oscar's, like, where they're best, like, I feel like Lando's race pace is better than Oscar's, but Oscar's ability to pass
Much better.
is
So
better
much better
than Lando's.
Oh my gosh.
Because I feel like
Lando
Oscar,
will take forever to pass.
Well, and I think we obviously saw when we got to the race, we'll get into that, but I think that's the thing, is that Oscar is more aggressive about passing faster.
Yeah.
Whereas Lando kind of toes around that passing.
I think Oscar is
it.
much better when it comes. This might be a controversial hot take. Oscar is a much better wheel-to-wheel racer because of the passing, his passing ability.
Yeah.
Where Lando will wait and wait and wait until the prime moment, where sometimes you just gotta go.
Risk it. Yeah.
And you kind of saw Lando, well, again, we'll get into the race. You saw him try to just give it a go. And I think when he tried to just give it a go this weekend, he was like, what now? What now?
Yeah. The top 8 for the sprint are the only people that score points as opposed to 10 in the classic race. So Max ended up winning, as Emma said. Oscar clinched that second place. Lando was in third, so it was a double podium for McLaren, which is good, but I think it's what we say every time with Lando. If he had 2 or 3 more laps, he would have passed Oscar.
Yeah.
George ended up getting 4th, Carlos was in 5th, Lewis was in 6th, Charles was in 7th, and Checo was in 8th. So I feel like Checo's kind of been, like, clinging to the points with his, like his bare hands.
Yeah.
Like, he is just...
But to the lower points, I feel like.
I'm curious to see where Checo's going to end in this driver's standings.
Because I feel like last year his bad races would be, like, 5th place or 7th place. But right now, his bad races are, like, 11th place.
Yeah. I mean, Red Bull's in the position they're in right now in the Constructors' Championship because of Max's performance.
With Max's points from last year, Red Bull could have not had a second driver, and he would have won, Red Bull would have won the Constructors with just his points alone.
And I mean, that speaks for itself.
Yeah.
I don't have anything else for the sprint. Do you?
Nope. I'm good to go into qualifying.
Into real, regular qualifying.
Q1. My first note is Max was, like, the first person out during the first qualifying session. What do you have?
I was just noticing how the last 2 weekends, the qualifying laps have gotten closer and closer.
Was it? I think it was this Q1 that was the closest Q1 ever since they started doing qualifying in this way. This is the closest Q1 that they've ever had.
I just feel like it has gotten so tight to such a degree that I think we're in for, it's gonna be a feisty latter half of the season.
Oh, given the way that this race was?
Yeah.
This race is friendship ending.
And then I know we talked about them earlier. Aston Martin, it's really been rough. I think qualifying, I think both drivers are struggling. Yeah.
But like you were saying before, it was such a close qualifying session, this first Q1, that before everybody was doing their last lap, so Lando was in P4, and his race engineer comes on the radio saying, I think we need to do another lap. And he was in P4, and they were thinking that he needed to do another lap, which says a lot about the track evolution, but also how close it is.
Yeah, I think it shows how...
Nobody's safe.
How nobody's safe and how, like, it is anyone's game right now. Knocked out of qualifying, the first qualifying, Q1, Jesus Christ, what am I saying? It's been a very long day, guys. Alex Albon, Lance Stroll, Valtteri Bottas, Logan Sargent, and Zhou Guan Yu. So, like, sprint and quali, similar faces.
Unfortunately.
I personally don't have anything for Q2. I feel like...
Oh, I have a few notes.
Oh, go for it.
Okay. So, early on, Max put out a lap, and it was over half a second faster than anyone else, which is a gigantic gap given how close everybody is.
And I feel like that was the first gap
I was like...
that we were like...
The Max of old is back.
It's going to be a 12-second gap race.
Yeah. I was like, this is 2023 Max. This is horrible for us.
Yeah.
But it did not end up like that, actually, the race, so that's great. Speaking of Aston Martin issues, Fernando Alonso goes onto his radio and says that he nearly crashed his car in turns 7 and 10. I watched the replay of it. I didn't see him almost crash, but I'm guessing it felt like it almost crashed to him. I just think their car is a shit show right now. It probably feels super slippery to him. It probably feels like he doesn't have a lot of control. So I thought that was an interesting thing for him to say, especially on the radio. And the Hulkenberg pit exit issue with Checo.
Yeah, what happened with that?
So, I guess he was released early or something, and he, like, cut the line or something. I wasn't exactly sure.
Was this when they were talking about, like, the way you enter the pit lane and, like, the, like... Never mind. I'm thinking about...
Enter the pit lane.
Ignore me. Never mind.
You're thinking about the race.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a weird issue in the pit exit with Hulkenberg and Checo. I think that ended up starting to be investigated, but then they were just like, whatever, I don't care. So the people who were out in Q2 were Daniel Ricciardo, which I think the fact that he was so close is very promising, given the fact that they had a lot of issues.
Something. Like, he was close.
And they were struggling last weekend.
Yeah.
And last weekend was when they brought all of their new upgrades, like a brand new car. For them to do so much better this weekend is always good. So Daniel Ricciardo, Kevin Magnussen, Pierre Gasly, Yuki Tsunoda, and Fernando Alonso. Q3. My first note, the carjack was Lewis.
Yeah.
I'm shocked that they weren't fined for that, to be honest, because when that one time where Williams left something like that on, like, in the pit lane, like right outside of their garage, they were fined a ton of money for it.
Yeah. You're right.
And this one, it literally was dragged out of the garage by a driver, and nothing happened.
Who knows?
The FIA.
Love their consistency.
They're so great. Charles went off track during his final lap, so he was not able to actually put up a faster time. He ended up in P6. And unfortunately, Oscar's lap, which had him in P3 or P4, was deleted, dropping him to P7.
It was P3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shame.
And I'm sure that he's really regretting that, because if he had started P3, he would have started where the winner started. And that means he could have won the race, potentially. But also, like Max said in Miami, if my mom had balls, then she'd be my dad.
Yeah, like, you...
Woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Yeah, like, you could say that about any sport.
Oh,
like,
about everything. You know. Do you have the top 10?
Yeah, so the top 10 for the qualifying was Max in first, Lando in second, then George, Carlos, Lewis, Charles, Oscar, Checo, Nico, and Esteban. I feel like Lewis has been, like, the solid 5-6 all season.
I feel like he's been silent, though. Like, we heard a lot of complaining in the first, like, race or two, and he has been silent since then.
Yeah, he's been pretty, like, just not really.
Just doing his thing.
Yeah, just racing.
Which I honestly, sometimes I prefer. Sometimes I don't want to hear a lot of the drivers yapping. Which is not an insult to Lewis. Lewis, I can hear him yap all day. There's some drivers that are complaining all the time that I would love for them to stop yapping. Because I just want to watch them drive sometimes. I don't want to hear you complain about how your teammate did not deal with...
driving a car.
No, that's not what I mean.
You sound like the FIA.
You know what I'm talking about. They're complaining when they're like Charles being like complaining about Carlos and like Carlos like also complaining about other people, and it's just like sometimes I just don't want to hear your beef with your teammate. Like sometimes keep that in the family. Like I don't want to hear if you've got beef with that. Like I don't want to hear Esteban and Pierre fighting.
Yeah.
We know you don't like each other. I don't need to hear it though.
Yeah.
Y'all signed to the same team. You knew who your teammate was going to be. What'd you expect?
You're driving me nuts. Let's get to the race.
You're going to get into the race now. I think this is the most notes that I've ever had for a race because it was... I usually can try and keep it to like one page, maybe like one and a... like. It's like 1 1/4 for me, which is a lot. Usually I keep it to like one page. But yeah, no, so this race started off with Joe from the pit lane.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else was on mediums. He was on hards. And the wind was so bad that even in like the lap that the drivers take getting to the grid, not the formation lap, but the one that they drive out.
Yeah.
George locked up into turn 3 en route to the grid, and his race engineer said that there was a 40 kilometer per hour wind gust. So it was not the easiest day of driving, especially because those cars are like little toy cars sometimes, and the way they can be thrown around.
Yeah.
So, off the start, Max and Lando kept position. Lewis passed Carlos to chase George. Do you want to go?
Charles and Oscar had contact, which caused Charles to need to pit for a new front wing, like, literally in the first lap.
Yeah.
He ended up tumbling down the grid. I don't know if he was in dead last or in 19th. But I feel like Charles won Monaco, and now Charles cannot win.
It's like Charles sold his soul to win Monaco, and now he is living in hell and paying for it.
Yeah, I just, like, what is going on?
I don't know,
because
honestly.
Carlos is doing he's doing okay.
Yeah,
you know?
I think Charles is one of the drivers that's just had a bout of bad luck.
Yeah, so, then the other note I have is that George and Lewis got a little scrappy. Yeah. And
there was a bunch of teammate battles.
Yeah, I think, but I don't think that there was this, like, in my eyes, like, from a spectator, I enjoyed the teammate battles, and I wasn't sitting there being like, oh, is that Brosades? Like, no, like, that wasn't this time. And that's the thing, and so...
No, the non-teammate battle that happened, that feels like Brosades.
But George took back third, resulting in, like Emma said, Carlos and Hamilton ending up getting into it. And then the next note I have is around lap 10. What about you?
Okay, so lap 7, Lewis had passed Carlos, but he had passed him outside of the track, so Lewis had to give the place back to Carlos, and Lewis did it immediately. Mm-hmm. I know some drivers will be like an asshole about it, but I think he was like, it's not worth it. It's so early on in the race. Let me just give it back to you, and I'll take it away in a second.
Yeah.
Lap 7, we also see Oscar pass Checo. My next note is lap 10 as well, which is when K-Mag and Ricardo both went into the pit for hards. This was the beginning of the pit stops, and this was early. If you were pitting then, it was basically a guarantee that you were going to have a 3-stop. If you waited, you were going to have a 2-stop.
Well, because I'm pretty sure it ends up being, like, another 10 laps until the last group of people go and pit.
This felt like the most amount of pit stops in a race ever.
It felt like, because I think
Charles stopped like 5 times.
I think it was just there was a lot of people that were stopping multiple times, more than, I think
and
we've seen a
all
lot.
over the place. Usually I feel like they're pitting around the same lap, where this was, like, all over the place.
Well, and also one thing we haven't talked about is that it was extremely hot.
Yeah.
Like, it was not extremely, like, we're just getting out of a heat wave in America, but it was, like, significantly hotter than what is normal in Austria. And so that's the other thing, is that I think the tire situation was becoming so difficult for people that they had to pit.
Yeah, I think it was, like, in the 80s in Austria, which has been, like, the high 90s for most of America, at least.
By lap 14, Max is already 5 seconds ahead of Lando. I feel like we haven't seen a gap like that for Red Bull in, like,
especially that early
minimum 5 races.
Jump back a little bit to lap 11. So K-Mag had pitted on lap 10. Lap 11, Hulk pitted, and Hulkenberg comes out to battle with K-Mag, which the timing, I don't think that was intentional by the team, but Hulkenberg came out as K-Mag was passing the pit exit, and so there was a little bit of a tuffle there between the two of them, and it lasted a couple of laps where they were fighting with each other. I think that they were next to each other, like, just following each other for a good majority of the race. Which is good, but K-Mag did have that one where his engineer came on the line and was like, you got to save the tires, and he goes, you saying that's Nico too? And his engineer was like, you both need to be saving your tires, and he's like, he literally says, F that, and I was like, damn, K-Mag, Menace Magnussen is back.
I think it was like, there were obviously issues with, like, certain scenarios of this race, but I do feel like it was, like, someone compared it to, like, this is what I imagine the drivers 30 years ago were acting like.
Oh, yeah.
And so, what else?
Okay, so Alonso hit Zhou.
Yeah.
Which was, it looked like he was trying to stop, so he didn't hit Zhou, but then he locked up, and it was just bad. And so he just like, bumped into Zhou.
Which resulted
in a 10-second time penalty. And then Lewis passed the white line on the pit entry, which then caused a 5-second penalty. We get to lap 24. Max and Lando both pit for hards. Max was exiting as Lando was entering, and it was a little close for Lando's comfort. But I think it was okay. They ended up investigating it, and Max was fine. Because they were investigating him for an unsafe release, but again, he was fine. This was also when Charles' engineer said he was projected for points. I think he needed a little bit of reassurance that he was going to be okay.
Interesting.
He did place 11th.
He said that when, wasn't Charles in, like, P18? And
he was like P18. And when he said that, I was like, okay. I was like, why are we lying to our drivers now?
We love positive affirmations, but shouldn't we tell them the truth?
I mean, I'm sure he probably was like, you're in P18, but if we execute this properly, you get... But also, for him to go from P18 to P11, Ferrari's strategy must have been pretty decent.
Yeah.
So, keep that up and just don't have issues, and Charles could win again.
Yeah.
Checo then got a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane. Another teammate battle. I just wrote, Ocon and Gasly duel. Ciao.
My note says Pierre and Esteban got into it a little over P11.
that was the most embarrassing part. It wasn't even for points.
With Gasly coming out on top.
And literally as Pierre passes Esteban, he goes, ciao! And DC's first comment was, how multilingual the drivers are nowadays. Like, you can speak French, Italian, English. What more can you speak, Pierre?
Oh my god. What's your next lap?
Lap 40, Max had an 8-second gap ahead of Lando, but then lap 46, Max only had a 6-second gap ahead of Lando. And
around lap 40, Max was on the radio complaining about his tires.
Yeah, he was like, these are shit.
So, I think that is another
because they had pitted for hards, and the hards were already showing to not be great.
Yeah.
So, Charles, now at this point, is finally up to P11. Go him. He just needed that positive affirmation, and he got there, which is great. Albon crossed the white line on the pit entry as well, like Lewis had, so he also got a 5-second penalty. There's a bunch of just like random penalties that were coming this weekend.
Yeah.
Lap 48. Okay, so Max had lapped both Haas's, but they were right behind him, and they decided, we're gonna fight. And Max goes on the radio, he goes, I can't take this for much longer, because the Haas's were trying to pass him, which the commentators are saying they can do. They can unlap themselves if it's possible. And they were both trying to. And Max was like, no.
I just feel like sometimes there's a moment where Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg are on the same wavelength. And you can just tell that they're like, we don't get this opportunity often. Like, let's fuck with Max. Like, obviously, a Haas versus a Red Bull, like, the Red Bull is going to end up on top.
Okay, but a Williams passed a Ferrari during this race also.
No, I know. But I think it's, like, you knew that what they were, like, they had to know what they were doing.
Oh, they definitely had, like, a little gremlin laugh in their heads, and they were like, this is our moment.
Yeah.
This is our time to shine. They in fact did not pass Max from what I know. No. But I think Max pitted a few laps later. So both lap 52, Max and Lando both went into the pit. And it was a slow stop for Red Bull because the left rear tire was not coming off. So it was like a 6-second pit stop for Red Bull.
I don't think we've ever seen a Red Bull pit stop since we've been watching.
I think it was the tire gun. Something was wrong with it. It was almost like a steak pit stop. It was strange. But then Lando got to take advantage of that because then when they both came out of the pit, Lando was only about 2 seconds behind Max, which is great. For all the drama that's about to ensue.
And just to remind you, this is lap 52 of 71.
Yeah.
So, like,
these next 20 laps are chaos.
The last
30 laps in total, really.
I genuinely think that this is going to be one of those races that are talked about 10 years down the line.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Like, I think so much happened in such a small amount of time in the last... I mean, we watched it last night again. It's insanity what happens in the last 10 laps.
Based off of these last 10 laps, I feel like we're going to have... I think it was Barcelona or Silverstone, like 2021, where Max, like, landed on top of Lewis's car. I think we're going to have another one of those.
Oh, I hope not. That's making me nauseous.
Okay. So, yeah, that slow pit stop, they come out. Lando's only 2 seconds behind Max. Lando tries to pass at turn 3, which is what he tried to do the day before in the sprint race. He tried to dive bomb on the inside, and Max saw that he was making the move, and he kind of moved a bit.
Do you know the parameters of the whole, like, reaction rules?
So, you can defend... But you can't, especially going into a braking zone, if someone's trying to pass you going into a braking zone, you can't make a move to block someone as they're doing that because that could be very dangerous.
Okay.
And that's kind of what Max was doing, which is why it's considered a problem. There are a lot of people that are saying that Lando trying to dive bomb to try and pass Max was wrong, but that is completely legal from what the commentators were saying. That's how you're supposed to pass, and it was completely legal. But the way that Max was moving, it wasn't defensive. It was reactive, and it wasn't safe.
Apparently, the reactive rules are something that are relatively new, and it was something that was put in place in the early 2020s because of Max. I think it was around 2021 that Max was like, this is how Max drives. And, like, that's... We'll get into it in the final thoughts before we, like, psychoanalyze a stranger.
Yeah.
But...
Okay, so then, as this is going on, Lando is on Max's tail.
Like, 0.2 to 0.5 seconds behind him.
The biggest gap, I think, was, like, 0.7.
They are just... Lando is lunging. Like, Lando is trying to
It was the most, I think, I've ever seen Lando try to pass someone.
It was the longest effort, I feel like, we've seen of someone trying to just get past Max. Or, like, trying to get past first.
So at that time, we also find out that Lando was shown a black and white flag, which is for track limits. It's the warning that if he goes off track one more time, then he is going to have a 5-second penalty. He did end up getting that 5-second penalty, but he was not able to serve it because of reasons in a second. I believe he'll probably end up having to serve that in Silverstone, actually. Because he didn't get to, so he might have to. I don't know, though, so we shall see. Lap 59. That's what they've done in the past.
I don't know. Damn it. Okay.
I know. Lap 59, turn 3, again, we see Lando go on the inside and try to pass Max that way as well. But he went too deep and wide, and so he ended up going off track, so Max was able to go straight. So Lando technically, passed him off track, so then he had to give the spot back to Max.
And he did it almost immediately.
He did it immediately.
Because...
Why waste the time?
Well, why waste the time? And when you're up against track limits right now, it's you don't want to piss off the stewards further. It's just do the appropriate thing.
Yeah. And so then, again, there's one point where Lando was ahead of Max on the apex, and Max ended up going off track and passing Lando, and would not give Lando the spot back when Lando technically was ahead of the apex. And the radio was saying, I think GP was saying to Max, McLaren thinks that you should give the spot back to Lando, and Max was like, no, why would I give it? I was ahead. Why would I give it back? Which is a problem within itself, I think.
Well,
this was the beginning of the end of this situation.
I think, here's my take on it. I think a lot of people are dogpiling on the Max and Lando drama.
Oh, yeah.
My thing is that we have had multiple stances where there has been shady moves like this, and the driver immediately defends himself.
Yeah.
And then they go and they rewatch the footage and they're like, oh shit, I was in the wrong. Obviously, we don't know if that'll come to fruition, if Max will even acknowledge this.
Usually they have at this point.
I know. And that's the thing, is that we're now a day after and he hasn't. But my whole thing is it is a problem in and of itself that there is...
Because there's a precedent for it.
Well, and I think that's the thing, is that earlier, literally 5 minutes earlier, Lando did it. And it's this, I think you made a really good point. It's this, you're a 3-time world champion. Yeah. Right? You're a race, a multiple race winner. And
you know you can beat
you know the rules.
You know the rules. You know you are such a good driver. You know you can beat Lando. You've done it every time except for once.
Yeah.
So you know that you can pass him. If you give him this spot back... do you think that you wouldn't be able to pass him? I don't know.
I do think Max not giving up the spot in the appropriate way was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
Because I think, and the pundits kind of talked about this, I think it went from racing, pushing the limits to oh, screw you. And so on lap 64, Max and Lando ended up colliding, resulting in punctures for both of them. What ended up happening was
Lando went on the inside again.
Went on the inside, lunged.
Max cut it, did not give him the room, which Max, because this is now, the 6th time Lando's tried to do that exact same move, so Max knows that that's going to happen, and Max cut it and caused the collision.
Well,
according to the stewards.
Yeah, so according to the stewards, basically the way a penalty was given towards the end of the race, Max ends up getting a 10-second penalty because of causing a collision. I think it speaks for itself. I think a lot of people are putting a lot of emotion into this. And I think maybe it's just the media fanning the rivalry flames.
Netflix is going to eat this up.
Yeah, I think that this is just competitive Max. Like, I think the whole, like...
This is the way he behaved in 2021.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of Lewis fans that are saying now Lando fans know how Lewis fans felt in 2021. Yeah. And I know that there were a lot of calls that went Lewis's way in 2021, and there were a lot of calls that went Max's way in 2021. And I think that this was one of the things where this call ended up going Lando's way. And Max isn't particularly happy about it because he doesn't think that he did anything wrong.
But also... Like, again, we've seen Max be annoyed about other penalties he's received.
I've never seen him get a penalty and be like, yeah, I messed up.
Yeah, he's never received one and been like, oh, you know what? That was well-deserved. Like, yeah. I get that. And not saying that, you know, a lot of the drivers are ever like...
There are a lot of the drivers, though, that when they get a penalty, they're like, yeah.
Yeah,
sorry,
and so...
guys.
Post-collision, they both end up driving the cars to the pit lane with punctured
Max
tires.
Immediately, his tire was punctured, completely gone.
And basically, this just left the door wide open for George, Oscar, and Carlos.
And George...
who were in third, fourth, and fifth.
George went. He went for it.
Because the thing is, too, is that there was a decent gap between George and Lando, but I think George kind of, like, driving up on it, you see what's happened. You're like, holy shit.
Yeah.
So, Lando ends up going in and had to retire the car, which was really upsetting because Max went in, switched his tires, and was able to complete the race.
Honestly, they should have put new tires on Lando's car and sent him out and have him serve the 5-second time penalty and have him just do that one lap so he didn't have to do it in Silverstone.
Yeah.
Kind of like Checo last year at, what is it, Qatar?
Yeah. I mean,
what if they should have? So yeah, Max ended up returning back on track and he ended up in 5th place. And yeah, that's when you find out Max got a 10-second penalty for the incident with Lando. The ending result was George in first.
Well, and I want to say before we get into all the results, so one thing I want to mention is just the fact that, like, through all that carnage, obviously George was in a great position, but just the fact that George was able to, you know, pick up the pieces. I also want to talk about Oscar Piastri. One, the fact that his time got deleted in quali, bummer. But the fact that he was able to finish second, which I think is a career best.
He's finished second before.
I think he's finished second before, but that's the highest he's ever gotten. And then also, I'm pretty sure from what I remember, Oscar was walking on George.
I think so, yeah.
And so, I don't know, I just think, like, because I think a lot of people are super duper focused on the Lando Max drama. That's like, we gotta give the guys that podiumed, like, the credit.
No, the people who podiumed, I was really happy for because they're always considered the second drivers on their teams, and I was quite happy that they got their moment. They got their flowers.
And, like, that's the thing is that I almost feel like it was, like, a little bit of a breath of fresh air. Obviously, we've seen, like, George and Carlos, like, more regularly on the podium. But, yeah, I feel like a lot of people are focused on the rivalry narrative right now, and it's like, let's look at, like, the people who actually, like, got the fruits of this carnage.
True.
But yeah, so results.
Yeah, quickly the results. So George won, obviously, Oscar second, Carlos third, Lewis fourth, Max fifth, Nico Hülkenberg sixth, Checo seventh, K-Mag eighth, Daniel Ricciardo ninth, Pierre 10th, Charles 11th, Esteban 12th, Lance 13th, Yuki 14th, Alex Albon 15th, Valtteri 16th, Zhou 17th, Fernando 18th, Logan 19th, and Lando did not finish. So now we're going to go into our final thoughts.
So, I don't know, have you seen all of this? It's coming out of the woodwork, I feel like, today more. Have you seen all the drama between Jos Verstappen and Christian Horner?
Oh, yeah, how Jos, I think it
is. They got into an argument.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what it is, but Christian and him are like, don't talk to me.
Yeah, there's been conversation online of, like, maybe that's why, like, we got the, like, I think Crofty called it Max 1.0, which...
Well, because people were saying that he was behaving how he was
when he was younger. And I think my problem is that this is now not a question of, oh, this is just Max competing. This is just Max when things get tight. It's a question of his level of maturity.
I have seen that online. People are like, he hasn't matured since 2021. And I think, guys, this one race, let's not question someone's entire character and personal development.
It's the first race in how many races where all of a sudden Max is fighting for his life. Like, I think the problem is like, guys, like, you have to think about the adrenaline and all of the, like,
well, yeah, I agree. We've had several
emotions.
races now where Lando, like, if he had 2 more laps, he would have caught Max. He caught Max, and now this is what happens when he catches Max. We haven't seen him catch Max yet.
Well, and I think, too, it's the conversation of, like, Max is a bully on the grid. I mean, we've talked about the way he does his starts. He likes to shove you out of the way. And
when it happens to him, it's like, you did a dirty start.
And I think the thing is, too, is that a lot of people have talked about, like, Lando was respectful up until a point, and then took the lunge, and then that's what ended up happening. And so I think, unfortunately, it's a learning lesson all around. I think Lando, you know, the strategy and the way he needs to move is something he needs to
find some other way to pass someone sometimes. I think once he saw that turn 3 wasn't working, maybe find some other turn to pass someone on or something else.
Like,
I know, it's much easier said than done.
Yeah, and as someone who doesn't race.
Yeah, but I think, look, there's clearly things that Lando did that was not great. There are clearly things that Max did that were not great. At the end of the day, this is the first time that both of them had to fight with each other in a long time to win a race.
Well,
and it ended poorly, obviously. The thing that has me frustrated is that it was a couple laps before the incident happened when Max would not stop reacting.
Yeah.
And Lando said he needs to stop doing that or else he's gonna cause a big shunt. And then it happened, and luckily it wasn't anything major, it was just a puncture, but, like, Lando literally called it, knowing how Max was going to drive, and Max cannot, from what I saw this weekend and what I've heard, he is a dirty wheel-to-wheel racer.
Yeah.
It's me or nobody when it comes to wheel-to-wheel racing, which obviously can become an issue. I'm interested to see how he is this upcoming weekend in Silverstone. And I also think that he takes the Austrian Grand Prix seriously because of it being, like, Red Bull's home race and it being a whole big thing. But, like, I think it was even the way he was speaking and the way he was driving, it seemed like the desperation of it. And I saw this one comment from a reporter that was like, well, you're a 3-time world champion, why didn't you just let him pass? And he was like, because I'm still trying to win a race, which I totally understand, but you gotta play fairly, and you not letting Lando pass when he was supposed to was not fair. And then the moving, like, I remember when Fernando did it last year when he moved, when he saw someone trying to make a move on him, he got a penalty for it, I'm pretty sure. Or he was he was being investigated for it, and he was like, I don't know. I didn't do anything. And we thought it was funny, but, like, I think he did end up getting a penalty for it because they were like, this is unsafe. It could cause a crash because it was in a braking zone, too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of things at play. I think, obviously, it's probably the craziest race we've had in terms of inter-team fighting, but then also, like, I feel like this is the closest sense of rivalry we've had in probably a year or two.
Yeah.
I think the problem is, too, is that it's getting the Hollywoodification, and I don't know if this is typical of this sport, if this is how they do it, if this is how they did Senna and Prost, if this is how they did other rivalries. But it just feels like every freaking conversation, and maybe even the way we've been talking about it, is so dramatic.
Oh, yeah.
Like, at the end of the day, they race. And we've talked about how many historical racers where this was every single weekend for them.
Well, so the thing that I'm very interested about is now, how do we move on from this? Because the media has definitely played it up, but Lando made an interesting comment when he was doing the post-race interviews, and he was actually standing directly next to Max while Max was doing an interview, which is incredibly awkward. But he was like, if he does not apologize for what he has done, I will have lost respect. And that's where it gets a little dicey, because it's like, your friends off the track, what do you mean by you're going to lose respect? This just feels weird. I really hope that this doesn't turn into something strange. I do feel like this is going to play out, like they're going to make this, if they make it up and they're totally fine, cool. And they're just like this on the track, whatever. But I do feel like this is how now they're going to portray, like, they're going to portray Lando and Max's friendship, how they portrayed, like, Niki Lauda and James Hunt, like Alan Prost and Ayrton Senna.
Yeah.
Like, they're going to portray it as very toxic because Netflix is going to pick this up and they're going to run with it.
I mean...
There's going to be a whole episode on this.
Yeah. I think it's funny, too, because, you know, I think a lot of fans can say that everyone's been hemming and hawing over the fact that the sport has gotten kind of sleepy.
And now it's crazy.
And people are hemming and hawing over how crazy it's gone. And it's like, guys.
This is when the FIA just needs to be consistent.
Yeah, and I think I think it's going to be interesting to see how they handle everything. Because I think it's going to get very tight. I think it's going to get really dramatic. And one thing I wanted to comment on, too, is the post-race interview with Lando from F1 was honestly, like, a little sad. I mean, a lot when he doesn't do
I didn't get to watch it.
But they asked him, they were like, how are you doing, Lando? And he was like, obviously I'm bummed. And, like, he just kind of got emotional, and he was like, there's just, like, a lot of damage to the car, and, like, that's just, like, a lot of money. And
well, in the cost cap era, any damage that happens to the car, especially leading into Silverstone, his home race, the team's home race, if they can't fix the car in time, like, it's going to be a lot of money to fix the car in time, and then they have to basically prevent all crashes moving forward. I don't know how Williams does it, truly.
I just, like, I think, too, it's sometimes the fact that, like, I can't assume, because, like, again, this is just, like, I'm just pontificating. I've never met these people, so, like, again, do not take, but it just kind of it sometimes feels like Max has been on top for so long that it's like he forgets about the growing pains, that like Red Bull just has like just poops out dollar bills, that like there's not this recognition of like, oh fuck, like that's gonna put a team like, and yes, it's a competition and like that's their, but I think it's just this like, just have like a little, and again, this is the Max that people are talking about, but it's like just have a little bit of empathy.
Be the Max that we've seen off track. Or with your friends.
On track. Like, he's been fine. Like,
be the Max that celebrates another person getting pole.
Like, that's the thing. Like, I think about, like, you know, his excitement for Lando. Yeah. You know? Like, I think that there are a lot of emotions probably going on in both of these men's head. That it's like, let's pump the brakes on the rivalry discourse. And, like...
Let's also remember that they are good friends. And, like, let's not have the media affect their friendship.
I mean, it's tough to, because, again, we don't know them, but it's going to be interesting to see
because you have freaking Crofty on Sky Sports being like, forget about Martin Garrix, forget about the private jets, forget about the private hangouts together, this could ruin their friendship. Bruh! Leave them alone, right? Like you don't need, stop commenting on their friendship personally. That just was too much.
It's just, sometimes, it's just racing.
Yeah.
Like, that's what it is. Like, I don't know. I think it's like, it's not that deep sometimes, but I do think that it wasn't Red Bull's lack of acknowledgement and ownership of what had happened.
The responsibility
was what was the most frustrating, I think, for McLaren fans. I mean, it was like, guys.
You even heard Oscar in his post-race interview. He was like, I'm excited to get second place, but, like, I'm really bummed for Lando that, like, what happened.
Well, because I think, too, from what I've seen, I think it was something that was pretty avoidable.
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day. And so I hope that Red Bull is able to rewatch tapes and actually come to a sane conclusion, because
the media is going to be expecting something. In the weekend warm-up interviews.
Oh, it's going to be the freaking
in the driver's interview,
town.
that's what they're going to be talking about.
Maybe Carlos Sainz will finally announce where he's going, and that'll
maybe they'll force him to talk about it, honestly. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so the next race is
Silverstone! I'm so excited.
It literally is in, 3 days. Silverstone is, the first race I feel like I remember watching, a whole weekend.
I will honestly never forget watching Silverstone last year, and in, the first turn or two, hearing Alex Jakes say, and now Lando Norris leads the British Grand Prix. I remember, literally screaming of excitement, because at that point he had only ever gotten second place, and, McLaren hadn't been doing well in that season until that race. I think that they are bringing some upgrades to Silverstone.
And it's a traditional weekend.
And it is a high speed, on the high speed turns, it is, I remember Lewis last year being that McLaren in the high speed turns is insane. Mm-hmm. So, I'm ready. And the Williams did really well here last year, which, based on their car this year, I don't think is going to be a repeat performance. But, one can hope. So.
I also, and we've talked about this before, but, yeah, very excited to see it. It's our favorite race, so.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.